Welcome to Fluent English Hub. Today, you are going to listen to an emotional English story called The Forgotten Letter. This story is about an old letter, a young postman, and two people separated by a misunderstanding. Listen carefully, enjoy the story, and learn English naturally through the story. Let's begin. My name is Alex Brown. I am 27 years old, and I work at a small post office in a quiet town called Greenfield. Greenfield is not a big town. There are only a few thousand people living there. Everyone knows everyone. The streets are quiet, there are small shops, old houses, and beautiful trees along the roads. I have worked at the post office for almost 5 years. My job is simple.
Every morning, I sort the letters. Then I put them into different bags. After that, I deliver them to homes and businesses around town. Most days are normal. I deliver birthday cards, I deliver bills, I deliver newspapers and business letters. Sometimes I deliver postcards from people traveling around the world. I have always liked my job because every letter has a story. But one rainy Monday morning, I found a letter that was very different. It was inside an old cardboard box. The box had been sitting in the storage room for many years. My manager had asked me to clean the room because we needed space for new equipment. I opened one box after another. Most of them contained old papers. Then I found a small yellow envelope. I picked it up carefully. The paper was old and soft. The corners were slightly damaged. There was no stamp.
There was no return address, but there was a name, Mrs. Eleanor White. I looked at the address, 17 Rose Street, Greenfield. I knew that address. Everyone in town knew it. The house at 17 Rose Street had been empty for more than 20 years. Nobody lived there anymore. I turned the envelope over. On the back was a date, 24 years earlier. I looked at the letter again. 24 years? I couldn't understand how it had been forgotten for so long. I took it to my manager. "Mr. Harris, look what I found." He looked at the envelope. Eleanor White? Yes. That house has been empty for years. I know. He shrugged. It must have been lost in an old storage box. What should I do with it? He thought for a moment. Probably throw it away. I looked at the envelope. For some reason, I didn't want to throw it away. Maybe it was because the letter had already waited 24 years. Maybe someone had written it because they had something important to say. Can I take it? My manager smiled. If you want to. I carefully put the envelope inside my bag. That evening, after work, I drove to Rose Street. Rain was still falling. The old house looked lonely. The garden was full of weeds. The windows were covered with dust. The paint on the front door had almost disappeared. I walked toward the house. Then I noticed something beside the door, an old wooden mailbox. The name Eleanor White was still written on it. I stood there, holding the letter. I wondered who Eleanor was. Why had someone written to her? Why had the letter never reached her? And where was she now? I slowly opened the mailbox. It was empty. I placed the old envelope inside. "There," I whispered.
At least you've finally reached the right house.
I turned around and walked back to my car. I thought that was the end of the story. I was wrong. The next morning, when I arrived at the post office, an elderly man was waiting for me. He was standing near the entrance. He wore a dark coat and held an old photograph in his hand. When he saw me, he walked toward me. "Are you Alex Brown?" "Yes." "My name is Thomas." He looked nervous. "I heard you found an old letter yesterday." I froze. "How do you know about the letter?" Thomas looked down at the photograph in his hand. "Because I wrote it." I stared at him. "You?" He nodded. 24 years ago. For the first time, I realized that the forgotten letter was not just an old piece of paper. It was connected to a story that someone had been carrying in his heart for 24 years, and I was about to learn what that story was. I looked at the old man standing in front of me. He was holding the photograph tightly. His hands were shaking. "You wrote the letter?" I asked. Thomas nodded. "Yes, 24 years ago." I looked at the old envelope again. "Why didn't you send it?" Thomas took a slow breath. "I thought I did." "What happened?" He looked toward the window. For a moment, he seemed lost in an old memory. Then he began to tell me his story. 24 years earlier, Thomas had been 35 years old. He worked at a small furniture shop in Greenfield. He was good with his hands. He could repair almost anything. His closest friend was a young woman named Eleanor White. They had known each other since they were children. They grew up on the same street. They went to the same school. They knew each other's families. They shared secrets. They celebrated birthdays together. They helped each other during difficult times. "We were like brother and sister," Thomas told me. "She was one of the most important people in my life." But one summer, everything changed. Thomas received an opportunity to work in another city. It was a very good job. It offered better pay and a chance to build a new future. "I was excited," he said. "I thought Eleanor would be happy for me." But Eleanor wasn't. She had recently lost her parents and was going through a difficult time. She felt that Thomas was leaving her when she needed him most. They had a serious argument. Eleanor said, "You are leaving everyone behind." Thomas replied angrily, "I have to think about my future too. You don't understand." "I understand more than you think." The argument became worse. Finally, Eleanor walked away. Thomas didn't follow her. He was too proud. The next morning, he left Greenfield. He moved to another city. At first, he expected Eleanor to call. She didn't. Weeks passed, then months. Thomas became busy with his new job, but he never forgot Eleanor. "I wanted to apologize," he told me. "I wanted to tell her that I was wrong." So I wrote the letter. He took the old photograph from his pocket. It showed two young people standing beside a large tree. Thomas pointed at the woman. "That's Eleanor." She was young and smiling. I could hardly recognize her. "What did you write?" Thomas looked embarrassed. "I wrote that I was sorry. I told her that I missed our friendship. I told her that leaving did not mean I had forgotten her. And I asked her to forgive me." He looked down. "But I never received an answer." "Did you send the letter?" "I believe I did."
Maybe she never received it. Maybe. Thomas sighed. After a few years, I returned to Greenfield.
But Eleanor was gone. I asked people about her. Nobody knew where she had moved. Then I heard that the house at Rose Street had been empty for years. I looked at him. So you've been wondering about her all this time? Thomas nodded. Every year, every birthday, every Christmas. I wondered where she was. I didn't know what to say. Then Thomas looked directly at me. Alex, can you help me? Help you find Eleanor? Yes. I thought about it. It wasn't really part of my job, but I couldn't forget the letter. Yes, I said. I'll help. Thomas smiled. Thank you. That afternoon, we started our search. Our first stop was the town library. The librarian, Mrs. Green, had worked there for more than 30 years. She listened carefully as we explained the situation. Eleanor White. She thought for a moment. I remember that name. She walked toward an old cabinet. Inside were boxes filled with newspapers and town records. After almost an hour of searching, she returned with a small newspaper. She placed it on the desk. Look at this. The article was dated 22 years earlier. It was about the opening of a small flower shop in a town near the coast. The owner's name was Eleanor White. Thomas stared at the newspaper. That's her. His voice became quiet. That's Eleanor. Under the article was the name of the flower shop, Eleanor's Garden. There was also an address. Thomas looked at me. Do you think she's still there? I don't know, but we can find out. The next morning, Thomas and I began our journey. The town was almost 3 hours away. We drove through green fields and small villages. For most of the journey, Thomas was quiet. Then he suddenly laughed. What? I just remembered something. What? When we were young, Eleanor hated driving. She always said she would rather walk. I laughed. What changed? Nothing. She probably still hates driving. For the first time since I had met him, Thomas looked completely relaxed. But as we got closer to the coast, he became quiet again. What if she doesn't want to see me? I looked at him. Then you should respect her decision. He nodded. And what if she is angry? You can apologize. What if she doesn't forgive me? I smiled. At least she'll know you tried. Thomas looked out the window. You're right. After a few minutes, he said, sometimes we spend years being afraid of a moment that lasts only a few minutes. I remembered those words. Finally, we arrived at the town. It was small and beautiful. There were colorful houses near the sea. People walked along the streets carrying bags of fresh food. We followed the address from the newspaper. Then we saw it. A small flower shop with a green door. Above the entrance was a wooden sign. Eleanor's Garden. Thomas stopped the car. For several seconds, he didn't move. His hands were resting on the steering wheel. She's here, he whispered. After all these years. He looked at me. I'm scared.
I smiled. That's okay. He took a deep breath. Then he opened the car door. We walked toward the flower shop. A small bell rang when Thomas opened the door. A woman stood behind the counter. She had silver hair. She was arranging a group of white flowers. She looked up. "Can I help you?" Thomas stopped. The woman looked at him. Her hands slowly became still. Her eyes became wider. She whispered one word. "Thomas?" He looked at her. Eleanor. 24 years of silence stood between them. Neither person knew what to say. Then, Thomas reached into his coat. He took out the old yellow envelope. "I've been trying to give you this for 24 years. Eleanor stared at the letter, her eyes filled with tears. And as she reached for the envelope, I realized that the forgotten letter had finally found the person it was meant for. But I didn't yet know what was written inside, and neither did Eleanor. Eleanor stood behind the counter. She looked at the old envelope in Thomas's hand. For a few seconds, she didn't take it. She simply stared at it. Then she slowly reached forward. Her fingers touched the yellow paper. "Is this my letter?" Thomas nodded. "Yes. I wrote it 24 years ago." Eleanor looked at him with surprise. "I never received it." "I know. I thought you never wrote to me." "I did. I sent it. But somehow it disappeared." Eleanor carefully opened the envelope. Her hands were shaking. She took out the old letter. The paper was yellow and fragile. She began to read. At first, she said nothing. Then a small tear rolled down her cheek. Thomas looked at the floor. He didn't want to interrupt her. After a few moments, Eleanor whispered, "You were sorry." Thomas nodded. "I was. You said you missed me." "I did. You said you were too proud." Thomas smiled sadly. "I was." Eleanor continued reading. The letter was simple. Thomas had written about their childhood. He remembered the tree where they used to sit. He remembered the summers they spent together. He remembered how Eleanor always brought extra food because she knew he was often hungry. And he apologized for leaving when she needed him. At the end of the letter, he had written, "I don't know if you will ever forgive me, but I hope you know that I never stopped caring about you." Eleanor lowered the letter. The shop was completely silent. Then she looked at Thomas. "Why didn't you come back?" Thomas took a deep breath. "I was afraid." "Afraid of what?" "Afraid that you wouldn't forgive me." Eleanor smiled sadly. "I was afraid too." Thomas looked surprised. "Of what?" "That you had forgotten me." Neither of them spoke. Then Eleanor laughed softly. we were both afraid. Thomas smiled. We wasted a lot of time. Yes. 24 years. Yes.
Eleanor folded the letter carefully. I wish I had received this years ago. Thomas nodded. So do I. But she looked at him. We have today. Thomas smiled. That's true. I stood quietly near the door. I didn't want to interrupt their conversation. After a few minutes, Eleanor turned toward me. Alex? Yes? Thank you. I smiled. I didn't do much. She shook her head. You did more than you think. She held up the letter. This was almost lost forever, but you didn't throw it away. I couldn't. Why? I thought for a moment. I think because someone took the time to write it. Eleanor smiled. That's exactly why it mattered. Thomas and Eleanor spent the rest of the afternoon talking. They remembered their childhood. They talked about old friends. They shared stories about their families. Sometimes they laughed. Sometimes they became quiet. But there was no anger anymore. Only two old friends who had finally found their way back to each other. Before we left, Eleanor walked to the back of the shop. She returned with a beautiful bouquet of flowers. She gave it to Thomas. These are for you. He smiled. I don't deserve them. Maybe not, she laughed. But I'm giving them to you anyway. Then she gave me a smaller bouquet for helping us. I thanked her. As we walked outside, Thomas looked happier than I had ever seen him.
On the drive home, neither of us spoke for a long time. Finally, Thomas said, Alex? Yes? Thank you. You already thanked me. I know, but I want to say it again. I smiled. You are welcome. He looked out the window. Do you know what I've learned? What? People think they have plenty of time, but sometimes we don't. I nodded. He continued. If you care about someone, tell them. If you are sorry, apologize. If you miss someone, call them. Don't wait 24 years. I laughed softly. I'll remember that. 3 months later, Thomas and Eleanor visited Greenfield together. They came to the post office carrying a small box. Thomas placed it on my desk. What's this? Open it.
Inside was a framed photograph. It showed Thomas and Eleanor standing together outside the flower shop. They were smiling. On the bottom of the frame were the words, "Some letters arrive late, but never too late to change a life." I smiled. This is beautiful. Thomas nodded. We wanted you to have it. Thank you. Eleanor looked at me. And we brought something else. She handed me a small envelope. Inside was a handwritten note. It said, Dear Alex, thank you for believing that an old letter still mattered. Because of you, two old friends found each other again. Never stop believing in small acts of kindness. They can create big changes. Eleanor and Thomas. I placed the note beside the photograph. I still have them today. Years have passed since I found that forgotten letter.
I still work at the post office. Every morning, I sort hundreds of letters. Some are new, some are old, some are simple, some are important. But whenever I see an old envelope, I remember Thomas and Eleanor. I remember that one misunderstanding kept two people apart for more than 20 years. I remember that both of them had wanted to say sorry. They had both wanted to reconnect. But fear and pride kept them silent.
And I learned one of the most important lessons of my life. Don't wait too long to say what matters. If you love someone, tell them. If you appreciate someone, thank them. If you made a mistake, say sorry. If you miss someone, reach out. We often think tomorrow will give us another chance. Sometimes it does, but sometimes it doesn't. A few simple words can change a relationship. A small act of kindness can change someone's day. And one forgotten letter can sometimes change an entire life.
Thank you for listening to The Forgotten Letter. I hope this story helped you practice your English and gave you a meaningful lesson. If you enjoyed the story, please like this video, subscribe to Fluent English Hub, and share it with someone who might enjoy it. And here's today's question. If you had one important letter to write, who would you send it to? Thank you for listening. Keep learning, keep practicing, and remember, never leave important words unsaid. I'll see you in the next English story.